So I'm Casey Lever, a compliance manager at VS, and I'm just going to be presenting an overview of the packaging and labeling compliance requirements, as well as some of the common pitfalls and mistakes that licensees make when they're trying to develop compliant labeling and packaging. This is hopefully the first of many compliance classrooms that we'll be happy to bring you. The topics we're going to cover today are the limits on packaging design, the requirements for packaging for multiple servings, the labeling requirements, a general overview essentially by each product type, the types of labels that are commonly used and those that you're able to use, as well as coverage of compliance with the first amended quarantine order. In the end, what we'll do is we'll go over some of the common pitfalls for labeling compliance and how you can avoid a costly mistake. So for packaging requirements, first and foremost, the packaging must be certified by a qualified third-party tamper or child-resistant packaging testing firm, and they have to essentially confirm that the packaging is in compliance with the most recent poison prevention packaging regulations. As of the November 1st regulations, this also includes that the packaging should not be able to be opened easily with scissors if it's appealing to children. The packaging must also be opaque and plain in design. It has to be resealable for any marijuana products intended for more than a single use, so multiple serving products. And when it is resealable, it also needs to be resealed and become tamper or child resistant again when it is sealed. Where compliance with the requirements of tamper or child resistant packaging is deemed to be unreasonably impractical, the regulations require marijuana products to be placed in an exit bag. So if you're using exit bags to meet the requirements of tamper and child resistant packaging, the exit bag itself must be resealable, and it also needs to include the statement, as it reads here, keep out of reach of children. It also needs to be certified tamper or child resistant. There are limits on your package design. A package cannot use bright colors, which in the regulations are defined as neon. They cannot resemble an existing branded product, including foods and beverages that don't contain marijuana. They cannot feature cartoons or feature a design or brand name that resembles a non-cannabis consumer product marketed to minors. A common example of that would be gummy bears or gummy worms. You wouldn't have a package that has, a picture of a gummy bear or gummy worm on it. You could not feature celebrities or symbols commonly used to target minors. You also cannot include images of minors or feature words typically referring to products associated with or marketed to minors. For packaging of multiple serving products, commonly edibles, concentrates, topicals, tinctures, you have to include the statement includes multiple servings. It has to be in all capital letters as it appears here, in print no smaller than 10-point font. Specifically, the font needs to be Times New Roman, Arial, or Helvetica. It needs any product that is multiple servings has to be easily divided into single servings and scored to easily identify what a single serving is. Multiple serving beverages are strictly prohibited. So you can have a single serving beverage that contains 5 milligrams of THC, but you cannot have one multiple serving beverage. It has to be resealable for any packaging that has multiple servings, as we mentioned previously. And each single serving must be marked, stamped, or otherwise imprinted with the symbol indicating the serving is a marijuana product. And this is the symbol here issued by the Commission that indicates that it is a marijuana product. Some of the general labeling requirements are that the label must be firmly affixed to the package. The wording must be no less than a 1/16 of an inch in size. And in general, there are different types of labels. There's, in other states, they commonly refer to them as a primary label or a secondary label. For Massachusetts labeling and packaging requirements, the information that is required is not separated into what is required on the permanent packaging versus what can go on what's commonly referred to as a seed to sale or like a tracking label. The symbols and warnings must appear exactly as they do in the regulations. We'll cover this later, but is a common pitfall that people will try to design packaging that looks nice, but that may include trying to change the colors of the symbols or modify capitalization and warnings. We're going to go over the information that's required on the labels now by product type, but I'm trying not to bore you by repeating the required information where it's the same for each product. And what I'm really going to try to focus on here is going through the required information by product type and highlighting what, in my experience, is commonly missed or improperly displayed. So the first label we're going to go over is flower. For labeling of flower, the name and the registration number of the marijuana cultivator that produced the marijuana, together with the retail licensee's information, is what is required on the package. Now, this is actually a common mistake in labeling flower because this is unique to a flower label. All the other product types you'll see as we go through require product manufacturing information. This is also a stumbling point traditionally when it comes to cultivators that are wholesaling flower and they're pre-packaging the flower into small amounts. You may not know who the retailer is when you're packaging this. So it is important that the final product, when it reaches the consumer, is labeled properly with the retailer information, as you are required, and the retailer will be required to ensure that the label is fully compliant when it reaches the consumer's hands. The next requirements are the quantity of usable marijuana contained in the package, the date that the marijuana retailer or marijuana cultivator packaged the contents, and a statement of which licensee packaged the product. Again, this is an important one that is frequently overlooked. Very often the cultivator is packaging the flower right now, but there are circumstances where cultivators are wholesaling out large amounts of flower and the retailer will be packaging it on site in a deli style dispensing process. It is important that the statement of which licensee performed the packaging ends up on this label. And we'll get into a few more details regarding this information as well. But to the extent you can call out specifically packaged by, this is going to help you avoid a lot of questions, whether it's from the regulators or other licensees that are trying to do a checklist to make sure that the labels are compliant. You also are required to have the batch number or the sequential serial number and a barcode when it is used to identify the batch associated with the manufacturing and processing of the cannabis. Now, you're also required to have the full cannabinoid profile. That's what you see here. By definition, the full cannabinoid profile is THC, THCA, CBD, and CBDA, as well as other cannabinoids that have surfaced through testing. Now, best practice, because the regulations specifically say, Delta 9 THC, is to use the Delta 9 symbol or make it very clear that that is the level that you're displaying. In addition, if you run the test on cannabis and you have other cannabinoids surface, it should be listed on the label. You also need the statement and the seal certifying that the product has been tested for contaminants and there were no adverse findings. This, if you are a current licensee and you were involved in the medical program at all, and you went through some transition, may know a little bit about this statement, in that there's no requirement for you to also list the specific regulatory requirement that essentially is requiring you to make this statement. There are a lot of people that try to include in compliance with 94G or in compliance with previously used regulations, and when the regulations have been updated or changed, it has caused a little bit of issues in that the label is no longer compliant. You also need to include this statement, including capitalization, which is very important, that the entire statement as required by the regulations is included and displayed in the way that it is displayed in the regulations, including capitalization, and it must be in the order that it is displayed in the actual regulations as well. So now we're going to move to the edible marijuana product label. A lot of it is the same, of course, from the flower labels when it comes to the content, cannabinoid profile. But what is unique to the edible marijuana product label is that, like I had mentioned before, you have to have the product manufacturer information. You don't need to list the retailer information like you did for flower, nor do you need to list the cultivator information. You need to have the name of the actual marijuana product, the quantity of usable marijuana contained within the product as measured in ounces, the type of marijuana used to produce the product, including what, if any, processing technique or solvents were used, and the date on which the edible product was produced and the recommended use by or expiration date. We will cover a little bit of that when we get to the end of the presentation as well. These are just sample labels, but it's just going to give you an idea of the way that some of this information is commonly displayed. So if the edible is perishable, you have to also list information that it must be refrigerated. You are required to list the net weight or volume in US customary and metric units. That's also a common mistake that is not listed as both. The type of marijuana used to produce the product, including what, if any, processing technique, as we had mentioned before. This is listed up here on the sample. The full cannabinoid profile. Again, if anything surfaces outside of THC, THCA, CBD, and CBDA, it must be listed. Even if any one of these, THC, THCA, CBD, or CBDA is 0, you still need to list those 4 on every single label. Again, that's kind of the common mistake that we're seeing in listing this particular piece of information. You also need to list the total amount of cannabinoids in the package and in each serving of the marijuana product, as well as in absolute terms and in percentage of volume. Serving size of the product in milligrams if the package is a multiple serving package. So you need to make sure that is listed very clearly what the serving size is. The number of servings within the marijuana product based on the limits required in the regulations. The information regarding the size of each serving size for the product by milligrams and the total number of servings of the marijuana in the product and the total amount of active THC in the product by milligrams. That seems like a mouthful, but what it really is a statement that simply says, a serving size of active THC in this product is 5 milligrams. This product contains 20 servings and the total amount of active THC in this product is 100 milligrams. It's essentially a statement that is laying out the simple math when it comes to serving size. For edible products, you also have to list the amount in grams of sodium, sugar, carbohydrates, and total fat per serving, and the nutritional fact panel. You also need to include the date on which the edible product was produced and the recommended use by or expiration date. What's important for edibles that's outside of flower is the directions for use for the product and the allergen warning. No matter what the edible product is, even if it seems like it's self-explanatory, you have to list very clearly what the directions for use are. Now for topicals and tinctures, you're going to essentially list the information that's very similar to what we just went over for the edible labels. It's product manufacturer info again, not retailer, not cultivator. It's just the product manufacturer information. You also need to list the product identity similar to what you had to do for edibles. Again, the topicals and tinctures are very similar. Most importantly, you still need to list the directions for use, and you still need to list what the serving size is. that can become difficult depending on the form of the product, but you need to list it. Even if the serving size is described as, you know, the size of a dime, and you're just taking your best guess to figure out based on the volume what the serving size will be, it has to be listed, and regardless, the serving size should not exceed 5 milligrams to ensure that you're completely compliant with the dosing limitations. When it comes to labeling concentrates and extracts, similar to edibles, the information that's required, except that you must list the term concentrate or extract on the actual label. Directions for use must also be included. You know, there is no exception for the directions. You have to come up with a serving size as well, you know, 3 to 5 second inhalation and waiting for effect. You know, serving size, again, do not let it exceed 5 milligrams. As of the November 1st regulations, the added requirement is that you list the amount of specific additives infused or incorporated during the manufacturing process, whether they're active or inactive. This includes thickening agents, thinning agents, and specific terpenes. They have to be listed in absolute terms and percentage of volume. So we're going to move on to the types of labels. There, right now in the market, are all different types of labels. Most importantly, the label has to be affixed to the package, so it is not easily removed or lost. A common one that we've seen now are the peel back labels, which are compliant. However, you do need to make sure that when you peel off the label, the information remains very clearly visible. You don't want the glue on the peel back to be too strong where you're actually removing some of the lettering. There's also tab or folded labels where just a piece of the label is actually affixed to the package and is not easily removable. And we had talked about this a little bit earlier, primary versus secondary packaging. There are many products that are just too small to include all of the information that is required on the label. It may be a very small concentrate jar, which then goes into a box. Best practice would be to include all of the information that you possibly can on the primary and the secondary packaging. However, in circumstances where the labeling of the marijuana product is unreasonable or impractical, you may include the labeling information on a peel back, or you can place the product in a sealed bag with an insert or an easily readable label affixed to the secondary bag. It touches along the same lines as well. Labeling of smaller containers. Speaking to what you are allowed to use for tamper or child resistant as well, you can use child resistant exit packaging where a container is so small that it does not meet either the tamper or child resistant, or it's not possible to affix a label to it that contains all of the information. We'll move on to the amended quarantine order, hot topic. As a result of the first amended quarantine order, there's an insert that is now required. So we're going to go over some of the insert information. The insert information should be provided at the point of sale. Wholesalers also have to include the physical insert and a copy of the testing certificate of analysis when you are selling product to a retailer. Now, within the product description at the point of sale is also where the information must go. That would traditionally mean the in-store menu. So if you're displaying your menu up on large television screens, or if you have a printout that is handed out, ensure that the information that is required on the insert is also displayed clearly on those menus or handouts. You also need to include the insert information on the website and any reserve ahead or delivery platform. This is where I've seen some of the compliance concerns come up, because you also need to make sure, it seems like a lot, you're ensuring that you're providing the information at the point of sale, You're giving it to people that you're selling to. If you're wholesaling, you're including it on your menus, but you need to make sure that on your websites and on any secondary websites, reserve ahead platforms, that information in its entirety is included as well. In addition, at the point of sale, so for retailers, you have to include this warning. This product has been tested for contaminants, including vitamin E acetate with no adverse findings. Now, capital letters, warning, vaporizer products may contain ingredients harmful to health when inhaled. Whenever you have a statement or warning that is required in the regulations or in guidance, it should really read exactly as it appears. So that would include, for this statement in particular, that warning is capitalized and bolded. The entire statement, vaporizer products may contain ingredients harmful to health when inhaled, should be bolded. So what is required on the insert? The insert must include that same warning that's required on the point of sale. This product has been tested for contaminants, including vitamin E acetate with no adverse findings. Warning, vaporizer products may contain ingredients harmful to health when inhaled. You also need to include a list of additives in absolute terms and as a percentage of volume. And they must include whether the additive is included on the FDA's inactive ingredient database for respiratory or oral routes of administration, and whether or not the product was produced with PEG or MCT. You also need to include a disclosure that the consumer may request to inspect the test results. This is very important for retailers, that you're aware, of course, that this insert requires this statement, but you also need to have the test results readily available in the event that you are asked to produce them. You also need to include on the insert the materials used in the device's atomizer coil and manufacturer identification of the device hardware, cartridge, battery, and any other components. Similar that, for the coil, that's usually titanium, titanium alloy, quartz, copper, microme, or other different components that are used to produce that coil. This is just a sample of or a template of what the insert could appear. If you would like to use something very similar to this, it has the required warning on there. It has the statement that you can request a copy of the test results, and it breaks down the additives. Now, you need to list the active or inactive ingredients, and this should include thickening or thinning agents and terpenes. This must be described, again, in absolute terms and percentage of volume. Now, this is a column that will describe if any of the inactive or active ingredients are actually on the FDA inactive ingredient database. If nothing that you're going to be listed is, you could simply remove it or just put not applicable. This is the statement regarding PEG and MCT, and this is the breakdown of your device components. Usually for the components, you're going to get this list from the manufacturer, and you'll include that here. You'll include the material for the atomizer, the battery, and the cartridge. I'm going to go through some of the common pitfalls of labeling compliance. We kind of touched on these as we worked through the descriptions. For warnings and statements, they really must appear as they do in the regulations. Same with the symbols. You don't want to mess with the colors. You need to make sure that they're very clearly visible on the labels and packaging. The process for wholesale, which we're going to go over in some of the next slides here, the tamper and child resistant requirements, referring to other products in the market as your bar for compliance, and properly displaying the test results. So the best practices to avoid a costly mistake in those categories are strict adherence to the regulations. Warning language, again, needs to appear exactly how it does in the regulations. The symbols need to appear color exactly as they are in the regulations. If, for example, you're going to have maybe a red background or something on your packaging, you would want to, just for the spirit of the intent of having these symbols, possibly put a white background or a black background, so that way it's very clear that the symbol is being displayed. And you need to present the required information clearly. For example, when you are going to list who it's packaged by, write directly on the label or packaging, packaged by. If you're listing net weight, or there's a weight listed that is intended to meet the requirement of net weight, it is best practice to just write out net weight or make it a shorter version of net weight. But you want to avoid any confusion from either the regulators or people you're wholesaling to. Wholesale orders are a big one. You would want to pre-screen your wholesale orders. What that would entail is getting images of the packaging, getting copies of the labels that are associated with the exact batch that you're going to receive. You want to get copies of the test results and copies of the tamper or child resistant certification. This will allow you to pre-screen any issues with the labeling compliance, make sure that it actually is tamper or child resistant. And if the primary package isn't, and you're discovering this during the wholesale process, there would be a discussion that would follow about what you need to do to sell that product compliant. Does that mean that you need to put it in an exit bag? Do you have the exit bags available? These are all things that could be worked out during the wholesale order process, prior to actually receiving any products on site. And the third, and one of the most important best practices, is rely on the regulations and guidance from the commission. Don't rely on what you're seeing in the market and say, well, this licensee is doing it, so it must be okay. Although it is okay to reference other people's, it is best practice to seek approval through the Cannabis Control Commission. You will do that throughout the inspection process, and as you develop new products and work on rebranding, you want to make sure you're in constant communication with your either assigned investigator or compliance officer for the medical program. And the commission is actually developing a pre-approval program. It's contemplated in the regulations, but I believe it is not fully developed yet, but it should be coming down the line shortly. Topics for compliance webinars will include advertising and marketing, security and transportation, license renewal, and ongoing compliance, which will include record keeping and best practices for audits. And I thank you all for joining me today. Again, if you have any questions for us or would like to reach out to me, my email is right here. You can call the office at 617-934-2121 if you have any questions about our program. Offerings. Our future